My friends, it's me again, continuing our series on these amazing conversations we're having with scientists and also experts in consciousness and the link between science and spirituality, if there is one. And today it's my great pleasure to interview and speak with Dr. Jan Holden, who's the editor of this amazing journal. I don't know if you know about it, Journal of Near-Death Studies. And I'm holding in my hand actually a very interesting issue that is just coming out, I believe. It's on the whole controversy around quantum physics and consciousness and whether there's a connection between the two, which we can talk about. But right now, I'm more interested in actually talking to Dr. Holden. uh, we'll come to this in a moment. But Dr. Holden, I want to know a little bit about your career. Yeah, I know that you have a doctorate in education and counseling from from various universities that you were in the faculty of University of North Texas. But tell us a little bit about your journey to here. How did you get here?
Well, it's such a delight to talk with you, and please feel free to call me Jan.
And you
And
can call me Deepak. Thank you.
wonderful, Deepak. So it's a long story, and there is no one event that has led me to this place, but I like to start with when I was in junior high, I enjoyed reading about things that couldn't be explained easily. I remember reading about, the sleeping prophet who could diagnose people from a distance and so forth. And when I was in college, my father gave me a book to read that he had read called The Great Soul Trial. And it's a book about a reclusive miner from Arizona. This is back in around 1960. He disappeared. And this is a true story. The state of Arizona opened his safe deposit box and found several $100,000 and a note that he would like the money used for research on the survival of the human soul after death. And so the state of Arizona had to put a notice in the paper saying that they had this money, and they thought nobody would pay it any attention. They just get to keep the money. But over 100 individuals and entities came forth to claim the money, such that the state of Arizona actually had to put on a trial to hear each of these people testify how they would fulfill the wishes of this James Kidd will. And so the book is a lot of the court testimony of people like the research director from the American Society for Psychical Research, the Psychical Research Foundation, testifying how they would research the survival of the human soul after death. And in retrospect, I read this book in 1970, and I look back on it as probably the most influential book of my life, because fast forwarding to the mid 1980s, when I was working on my doctoral dissertation, I ended up doing it on something related to near-death experiences. And that experience of doing that research just absolutely hooked me. So for the last 30 plus years, I've been continuing to research near-death and related experiences. And, in NDEs, there are a lot of other experiences like after-death communication, mystical experience, out-of-body experience, past life memories, and so forth. So all of that has been the domain of my research over the past many years. And in the process, I became very involved with the International Association for Near-Death Studies. That journal is where I published my very first article back in 1988. And the longtime editor, Bruce Grayson, when it came time for him to try to turn the journal over to someone else, he asked me if I would take it on. That was a little over 10 years ago. So he edited it for like 20 years, and I've been editing it now for about 10 years. So that's a little bit about my background. And I was a counselor educator at the University of North Texas. And so this was my research area.
I see. Well, we'll put your bio at the bottom of this video.
Oh,
In the meanwhile, let me ask you some direct questions,
yeah.
okay? Because obviously you've been in this area of research for a long time.
Mhm.
You've spoken to a lot of people, you've done your own research, you've been the editor of this journal for a long time. So, cutting to the chase, do we have a soul? In
Yes.
your opinion?
In my opinion, I appreciate you asking in my opinion because I like to differentiate between what we can know from research and what comes from our opinion. And my opinion is it isn't. I wouldn't say that I think. I would say that I know that we have a soul, and that our consciousness is more than our brains, and that really comes out of near-death experiences, and especially the phenomenon of veridical perception, which is when during the near-death experience the person perceives something that, based on the condition and position of their physical body, they shouldn't have been able to perceive, yet they did, and it's later shown to be accurate. And especially when what they perceived contradicted their expectations or was just outside of anything they would have expected, and yet it's shown to be accurate. It's very evidential that that consciousness is capable of functioning apart from the physical body and the brain.
So, where is this consciousness that we call the soul right now? Where is your consciousness? Where is my consciousness that we call the soul? Does it
Well,
have a location or is it beyond space and time?
it's beyond space and time, I think, and and uh, and I usually experience it as being skin encapsulated. You know, that my consciousness is within my body somehow. But I believe that that's just a learned um, limitation that we all learn from very early on in life and through the process of normal development. And because I have had experiences, and I'm sure you have, many of your listeners have, of knowing things that were beyond the capability of physically knowing. For example, one day I was sitting at my office at the university, just working at the computer, doing my normal things. And suddenly, this knowing washed through me. As I say this, I get chills. This knowing washed through me that my husband was going to be in a serious accident and he was going to be okay. And I didn't know when it was going to be, what it was going to involve, or anything. I just knew that that was going to happen, and that knowing stayed with me for about maybe 40 seconds or so. And whenever something like this happens, I stop and just stay with what's happening to see if there's any more information there, whatever. And but no, that was it, and then it faded away. And but I was left with the distinct impression. And indeed, that night, he went on one of his usual Tuesday night rides. And but this night, I got a call from the hospital emergency room. He had been riding along. There was a change in the pavement. His wheel got caught, and he was thrown off of his bike, and he hit his head. He was unconscious for about 5 minutes, which you know is not a good thing. And but by the time when the phone rang and I saw it was his phone number, I was like, why is he calling me? This is the middle of his ride. And I said hello, and it was this person in the emergency room saying, you know, I'm at the emergency room. I'm here with your husband, and he was unconscious for 5 minutes, but don't worry, he seems to be fine now. But before he even said that, I just knew, because I had known earlier. And there was no reason to think this. By that time, we'd been together for several years. He went riding every Tuesday night. He'd never had an accident. And we've now been married over 20 years. That's the only time he ever had an accident, the only time I ever had a premonition or a precognitive knowing that something was going to happen. So, so there is we have access to knowledge that is beyond space and time. And I think the only thing that keeps us from knowing all of that is our conditioning. And it's probably a good thing, because if we knew everything all the time, it'd be kind of hard to function. But I believe we have access to it if we know how to access it.
As we look across the whole span of studies that we can roughly call near-death studies, they give us a clue to what we might call dormant human potentials, such as precognition, memory of past lives, remote viewing, even some people claim remote healing, and also contact with people who have physically passed on.
Mhm.
So, I've had a couple of very interesting experiences with both patients and also, my own mother. When she was passing, she immediately started speaking as if live to her parents who had passed on, decades ago, and she was speaking to her sister, etc. Of course, I wasn't there, but this is what I was told. But then this has been an experience with many other patients I've known.
Yeah.
And I was speaking some time ago to an end-of-life researcher who said that many people at the end of their life have something called end-of-life lucidity, where they have gamma waves over 40 hertz per second, and they have extreme lucidity. So extrasensory perception, precognition, memory of past lifetimes, contact with dead friends and relatives, remote viewing. These are all experiences that have been reported thousands of times by tens of thousands of people. Am I correct?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You are correct.
So,
And several authors have written books about this. And I think in some of your books, you've talked about these kinds of things, but other people like Charles Tart, and there's now the Galileo Commission, which is part of the Scientific and Medical Network in London. They're doing a lot of work compiling, bringing together the evidence for all of these things. So yeah, there's a lot of documentation.
so, I've kind of struggled with this whole issue that people call the mind-body problem all my life. But I also do come from a background where, from a wisdom tradition of spirituality, we call it Vedanta, Kashmir Shaivism, aspects of Buddhist studies, where actually the physical world is seen as a human construct for a changing perceptual human activity. So the bandwidth of human perceptual activity is very small. The visual bandwidth is 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum. The acoustic bandwidth of hearing is also less than 1% of what's available out there.
Yeah.
Similarly, when we taste something or smell something or touch something, we actually exclude most of the information. If I touch this, it's basically electrons bumping into electrons, and the resistance creates the experience of sensation. So in the tradition I come from, the physical body and the physical world are a changing, intermittent, but ceaseless, intermittent and also ceaseless stream of sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts. And humans then give construct to that. They say, oh, this fluctuation of consciousness is thought or imagination or emotion. This fluctuation of consciousness is perception. But actually, that all there is consciousness, which is non-local and is fluctuating. And even the fluctuations are non-local, but we somehow interpret them as mind, body, and universe, which is a changing scene. It's a changing scene. The body, mind, and the what we call the universe are a unified modulation of consciousness knowing itself as me and other, or me and all this, but all it is a reification, if you might say, of sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts. And the whole notion of embodiment is a learned phenomenon. As soon as you're born, you say, oh, you're Deepak Chopra, you're Indian, you're male, and this is your religion, on and on. And so you create a provisional identity, and then all the fears of death, etc., come from this provisional identity, which is very hard to pin down. At night, for example, these days, one of my practices of meditation is I recapitulate my life, see how far back I can go. So, now I can go back to maybe 5 years. When I was 5 years old, I can remember sitting on my mother's lap. I can see her face. I can smell her skin. I can hear her singing and her voice. And I can see that little boy that's in her lap. But then I see other boys, in school. That's Deepak as in high school. That's Deepak in medical school. That's Deepak in internship or residency. And as I witness that, I get these conundrums. Who is recapitulating? Who is remembering? Where are those memories? And how come I can't relate to some of these guys that are called Deepak Chopra? There's different mind, different body, different emphasis on memories, different values. I learned how to skate when I was 6 years of age. I didn't skate again till I was 35. But how did this brain at 35 remember how to skate what the brain at age 6 years did? And honestly, as I meditate, I cannot convince myself that all these conundrums, these queries, these insights, this intuition, this creativity, this imagination, this questioning is the dance of atoms and molecules and force fields and gravity somehow coming together so we can have this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. It absolutely feels that there is something unifying all of that, something deep, foundational that's unifying all of those things. And of course, how all of that relates to the electrochemical events in our brain is one of the big challenges of science and humanity today. So yeah, I'm completely with you on that.
But here, now the electrical activity we see in the brain, or the brain itself, or the nervous system, is also an experience in consciousness. It's in the contents of consciousness in the same way as this book is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. So, well, I have a question for you. Considering our knowing that consciousness is non-local, it's eternal without spatial or temporal limits. What is the purpose of our embodiment in a physical existence? This temporary physical existence. What's your belief from your Vedantic background and so forth?
So, from the Vedantic background, the purpose is to discover your true self, your true identity, and get rid of the idea that there is or ever was a physical world. Wittgenstein said, we are asleep, our life is a dream, but once in a while we wake up enough to know that we're dreaming. So as I look at this Vedantic understanding, then the purpose becomes to actually realize every possibility for creativity that exists in non-local consciousness. So, when I look, for example, even at another species like a giraffe, or I look at an elephant, or I look at a camel, or I look at, the simulations that we have of dinosaurs millions of years ago, these creatures don't look like they should be graceful. They look so clumsy in their anatomy and so unusual. Anything from a caterpillar to a butterfly to a bat to a human, to me, they look like modifications of images reified and experienced out there in three-dimensional reality, but they're all constructed in our consciousness, including our own body. So the ultimate goal from a Vedantic perspective is what they call self-realization, which is you're not a body, which is a changing stream of perceptions. You're not a mind, which is a changing stream of thoughts and feelings and emotions and images. You are the generator of all this, and you have constructed, literally constructed, your experience of mind, body, and universe through what I call magical lies, because every perception is magically a lie. I mean, my perception tells me that the earth is flat. No one believes that anymore. My perception tells me that the ground I'm walking on is stationary, and I know it's spinning at dizzying speeds and hurtling through space at thousands of miles an hour. My perception tells me that you and I are solid, three-dimensional. We know we are proportionately as void as intergalactic space. So everything we experience is a magical lie, and yet without it, we wouldn't be here. I mean, if I could see the Earth spinning and hurtling through space and being proportionately as void as intergalactic space, I would not survive. So the magical lie is necessary for the survival of the fictional character in the collective dreamscape. But my job is to wake up from that fictional character and see all the fictional characters and the dreamscape are part of the matrix of conscious agents. So what you call a soul, and I call a soul, we can also say we are conscious agents differentiated from infinity for maximum diversity of imagination and creativity and evolution. That would be the purpose.
Okay.
Self-realization.
So I'm interested to hear what you think about the relationship between what I'm about to say and what you just said. So people who've had near-death experiences, many of them have experienced a life review. And in that life review, they've re-experienced usually every moment of their life and experienced also not only reviewing it from the outside and re-experiencing it from the inside, but also experienced being every person with whom they interacted. So in other words, a near-death experiencer would say that someday when you and I both physically die, we will have the experience of knowing what each other felt in this moment. I will know what it is to be you. You will know what it is to be me. And we'll feel the effect that we had on each other. And so many, of course, I don't know anybody who doesn't have regrets about some way that they treated someone. But during the life review, the near-death experiencer feels the effect, and it isn't just the most important things you would think. It's like a near-death experiencer talked about how one day they were going through a grocery line and were kind of rude to the checker. And they, in their near-death experience, they relived that moment. They experienced being the checker and feeling what she felt. It happened to be a female. And then they also experienced how that put her in a bad mood, and she was snippy to other people, and he felt what they felt. So he felt like the ripple effect of his actions. And so, and conversely, people have had the experience, like one near-death experiencer was telling me just a couple of weeks ago in their NDE, they again were standing in a grocery line, and this time somebody in front of them was she didn't have quite enough money to pay. It was just something like 13 cents or something. She just couldn't buy it. And she was about to put it back. And the near-death experiencer said, oh, no, here's the 13 cents, so you can get it. And she said she felt what a tremendous, like that person was really struggling at that time. And that 13 cents meant so much to them. And she then felt the repercussions of that in that person's life. So a lot of times near-death experiencers come back saying that their sense of at least one aspect of the purpose of life is to advance in our capacity to love, to behave, to experience and behave with compassion and love for each other. And so, and I don't think that they would disagree that at another level, maybe an even deeper level, it's to discover who we really are and that we're not who we think we are and all that. But this element of loving, in fact, they often come back saying that our lives have two primary purposes. The first and most important is to advance in our capacity to love. The other is to acquire knowledge, and that includes, knowing who we are. So, I'm curious about how any of that fits in with a Vedantic view, if at all.
It fits in very well with the Vedantic view, but also with the Buddhist view. So, Thich Nhat Hanh used to say, he's the Vietnamese monk, a Buddhist scholar. One of his famous expressions was, we are interbeings in the inter-isness. So each of us is an interbeing in the inter-isness. And as conscious agents, we are part of a matrix of interbeingness. And we experience this interbeingness every time we experience empathy or compassion or love or joy or equanimity. These are, in Buddhist traditions, are called divine emotions because they give us a clue to our identity as interbeingness. Now, having said that, there's a very interesting, we've been doing our own kind of studies here and there. Some of them are anecdotal. But you know that when a mother and a baby are very bonded, and they can sense each other's biological needs. For example, a baby can be in one room sleeping, mother is in the other room sleeping, both in deep sleep. The baby wakes up with hunger and has not yet cried, and the mother's breast leaks with milk at the same time. Yeah. That's a non-local correlation. That's well accepted. Then you can see many anecdotal studies on that, but people have documented that. We've even done some studies. Unfortunately, these are very difficult studies to do, where you have two people who are bonded in love, and we separate them. It could be a mother and a daughter, or a sibling, or significant other. Then you take them into meditation, and theoretically, you can put them in a Faraday chamber, and you shine a flashlight in one eye, and both brains light up simultaneously, which means there's some level where there's deep inseparability. It's not even interconnection, it's inseparability. So when you look at Vedanta, and the poets and the writers of Vedanta like Tagore, they talk about love, beauty, truth, goodness as all so-called Platonic values that actually take us in the direction of truth. Love, goodness, beauty, truth, harmony, synchronicity, all of that is an aspect of our interbeingness. Now, it goes deeper because Tagore says love is not just a sentiment or an emotion. Love is the ultimate truth at the heart of creation. And that ultimate truth at the heart of creation is the inseparability of beingness. So even though I think of myself as a separate from you, I'm actually differentiated from the same one consciousness. the same infinite consciousness differentiates into sentient beings, not just human, all sentient beings. And all sentient beings have their own perceptual experiences, which is their universe. Right now, you, even though we share a common universe, you are still manufacturing your unique experience of that common universe. You're also not only manufacturing your unique experience, you're giving it meaning, you're getting emotions out of it. And yet you and I are not separate, we're differentiated in the same way that a stem cell differentiates into eyes and nose and heart and brain and hair follicles and genitalia and nails. These are all differentiated from the same original stem cell. We are all differentiated from the same original infinity as conscious agents in this matrix of interbeingness. And love and compassion and empathy and joy are actually the windows to the interbeingness. And in fact, some people even go further and say that you and I are actually holograms of the same cosmic body. We just look different because we are being viewed from a different window of perception. So as long as we are looking through the cosmic being or the cosmic infinite consciousness is looking out of these infinite windows at itself as you, me, and everything that we call sentience, and even the biosphere is an extension of sentience. So it's not like you needed certain conditions for the ecosystem to evolve mathematically for life to emerge. It was life that caused the ecosystem to emerge. And that at the deepest level, genetic information, your genetic information and my genetic information, but the genetic information of trees and bugs and all sentient beings, bacteria and fungi, it's all entangled. And genetic information is nothing other than the symbolic representation of the interbeingness of conscious agents that are differentiated from infinity. It's so radically different because now you don't have a mind-body problem. There isn't a body, there isn't a universe, there is no embodiment. It's all a magical lie. That's why it's called Maya. Maya means illusion, but Maya is also related to the word matrix, and it related to the word time and measurement and music and matter. Matter is the matrix of Maya, and the cosmic being is I shouldn't say it sounds trivial to say this is the play of the cosmic being, but in fact it is. It is the play of the cosmic being experiencing itself as infinite knowers, infinite modes of knowing, and infinite modes of knowledge. So you're right, expansion of knowledge, and ultimately the direction of pure love as the ultimate truth at the heart of creation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it sounds like what near-death experiencers tend to report, of course, they don't all report exactly the same thing, but there are these themes that are very common, is very compatible with Vedantic and Buddhist perspective.
Yes. And also with the Gnostic Gospels and the Gospel of Thomas and so on. So before we end, I want to just talk a little bit about this because, I in fact find it a little amusing that we create these models and then we fight about our models. Quantum mechanics is a human construct like anything else. And, it has, as we know, 35 interpretations. And some of us say, oh, yeah, the Copenhagen, the John Boyne Norman, the collapse, decoherence. These are all still magical lies. These are maps. The only reality is, can you explain who's asking the question? Who's doing quantum mechanics? When we talk about the observer, where is the observer? What is the observer? None of that is addressed. So while this was a very interesting thing to participate in, it's still a battle of models. And in the end, my response is, who cares? You know, do we need science to validate spiritual experiences, or are we just responding to the gospels, or what should I say, the the champions of scientism? You know, because science is just a methodology that predicts the results of experiments. Scientism becomes a religion. And when we start doing this, you know, we are basically arguing with the apostles of scientism rather than with scientists, is my opinion.
Mhm,
But,
mhm.
but it's still very useful to have this.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. And I think one thing this does raise to me, why do we assume that the human insights into the nature of reality, which are based on human perceptual experiences, are more valid than the experience of any sentient being?
Ask that
Why are
question.
human models more accurate, if they are?
Say that question again. Help me. Help me.
Okay, so you know, when I look at a tree, what does it look to an insect with 100 eyes? What does it look like to a bat that knows it as the echo of ultrasound? What does it look like to a chameleon whose eyeballs swivel on two different axes? And I can even remotely imagine what it looks like to a chameleon. What does it look like to a honeybee that navigates through ultraviolet? Why do I assume that human perceptual experience and its interpretation, even quantum mechanical, is the
Mhm.
one that's
Oh,
valid?
yeah.
Why
Yeah.
is human experience more valid than any other experience? Because
Yeah.
all our models are constructed by human beings.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the statement behind your question is that it's not. It's not more valid. Yeah, we treat it as if it is, but who says it is? Yeah. Uh-huh. And I wonder too, um, whether you believe that the reduction of human suffering is uh, a worthy goal, and if so, how all of what we've been talking about relates to that goal, the reduction of human suffering.
So here is what the Vedanta says about this. They said there are five causes of human suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Not true, knowing absolute truth, first. Second, grasping and clinging at experience, which is ephemeral, transient, ungraspable. Third is recoiling from the same experiences. Fourth is identifying with the skin encapsulated ego. And the fifth is the fear of death. And then they have a prescription. The prescription is yoga, the yoga of self reflection, the yoga of meditation, the yoga of love, and the yoga of action. These are called royal yoga, is meditation. The yoga of love is called bhakti yoga. The yoga of self-reflection is called the yoga of the intellect, and the yoga of alleviating suffering for others in order for you to feel better is called karma yoga. So these are all yogas to realize the truth, and alleviation of suffering becomes part of our dharma, so to speak, for our own enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
how it's understood in these
Yeah.
institutions.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, this
And
has been a very good conversation. So, what I'd like to do is I'd like to give it a title.
mhm.
Before you go, let's agree on the title.
Okay.
So, what we call it near death studies, colon, and then we add everything: out of body experiences, precognition, memory of other lifetimes, remote viewing, remote healing, um, and extrasensory perception, and immortality as the subheadings after that. Is that a conversation with Dr. Janice Holden?
That
Is that
sounds
okay?
that sounds good to me.
Okay, Carolyn, are you there?